We, the jury, find the defendant, Timothy Forrest Bass, guilty of the crime of murder in the first degree as charged in count 1.
This cold case took nearly 30 years for authorities to finally catch the killer.
I would first like to say that I'm 100% innocent of this crime. Furthermore, I don't believe I received a fair trial.
On November 24, 1989, 18-year-old Mandy Stavik went out for her usual morning jog and never returned. Days later, her body was found in a nearby river. She had been brutally assaulted and murdered. Semen was recovered, but despite exhaustive efforts, the DNA led nowhere. Who could be vile enough to take the life of this innocent young woman? And how could the killer get away for so long? In today's episode, we'll explore the heartbreaking case of Mandy Stavik, a bright and promising young woman whose life was senselessly cut short while her murderer roamed free. But before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated on our latest true crime stories. Mandy Stavik was an 18-year-old college freshman from the small, tight-knit town of Acme, Washington. She was a familiar face and a beloved figure within the community. Her mother described her as a bright and driven young girl. She excelled in everything she did. Mandy was a top student, a standout athlete, and a cheerleader with dreams of becoming an airline pilot. Tragically, she never had the chance to live out her dreams. On the day she went missing, Mandy Stavik had just returned home from university for the Thanksgiving holiday. After spending time with her family the day before, she decided to go for a jog the following afternoon. It was around 2:30 p.m. that Mandy left the family home with her German Shepherd Kyra. She headed toward the rural roads around their property, an area that she had known for her entire life. However, later that day, only her dog returned home while Mandy was nowhere to be found. This was unusual and alarming. Sensing something was wrong, her family began searching the surrounding area, retracing her usual route. As the hours passed with no sign of Mandy, they called the police and a search effort quickly began, involving local authorities and volunteers. The small town of Acme rallied together, but despite their efforts, it wasn't until 3 days later that Mandy's body was discovered in the South Fork of the Nooksack River, confirming their worst fears. Her body was found face down, partially submerged in the water. She was wearing only her running shoes, with the rest of her clothing removed, suggesting that Mandy had been sexually assaulted before being murdered. It was a haunting and devastating scene, one that left the Stavik family and the entire community shattered. Detective Ron Peterson was the first to spot Mandy's body. He took great care in preserving the crime scene to avoid contaminating evidence, and his efforts eventually paid off when male DNA was successfully recovered from her body. Scratches were also found on her body, suggesting that she may have managed to escape after being raped. She must have run through thick blackberry bushes in an attempt to flee, but was ultimately caught. Afterward, Mandy was likely knocked unconscious and then drowned. Investigators believed she was abducted at gunpoint, possibly by someone in a pickup truck seen in the area around the time Mandy went missing. The perpetrator likely used the vehicle to follow her or abduct her directly. In the aftermath, DNA was collected from over 30 local men, but no match was found. All potential suspects, including drifters traveling through the area and even Mandy's boyfriend, were ruled out. And for the next 25 years, investigators had no viable leads or potential suspects. The case went cold, and as more time passed, Mandy's family began to lose hope of ever seeing justice for their daughter. However, that wasn't the case for Detective Kevin Bowie, who had graduated from Mount Baker High School, the same school Mandy attended. Though he wasn't close to her, Kevin Bowie took her unjust murder personally, just like many others in Acme town. Years later, as a deputy, he reopened her case and became the lead investigator. Detective Bowie refused to let her injustice be forgotten, and neither did the community. While scouring the old case files, one name caught his attention. John Wisniewski, a local drug dealer who had been questioned years earlier. Wisniewski had claimed to know who was responsible for Mandy's murder, but his DNA didn't match the evidence found at the crime scene. Still, Bowie felt something was off about him. Determined to get answers, Bowie traveled to Cambodia in 2010, where Wisniewski had relocated, hoping to question him again. However, this lead ultimately went nowhere, and once again, Mandy's murder case seemed to hit a dead end. In 2013, 3 years after the case had stalled, a new tip emerged from an unexpected source. Two mothers, Heather Backstrom and Marilee Anderson, had brought their children to a water park. Although they didn't know each other beforehand, they struck up a conversation while watching their kids play. During their chat, the name Mandy Stavik soon came up. To their surprise, both women realized they had suspected the same man responsible for Mandy's death. This connection compelled them to speak out, and together they shared their concerns about Tim Bass. Tim Bass was also a graduate of Mount Baker High School. He lived less than 2 miles from Mandy's home, right along her usual jogging route. In 1989, investigators briefly looked into him, but dismissed him as a suspect because his family was well liked in the community. Tim Bass was also a graduate of Mount Baker High School. He lived less than 2 miles from Mandy's home, right along her usual jogging route. In 1989, investigators briefly looked into him, but dismissed him as a suspect because his family was well liked in the community. At the time, authorities believed only an outsider, a stranger to the community, could be responsible for such a crime. As a result, Tim Bass was overlooked, except the two women. When asked why they suspected him, both of them shared disturbing encounters they had with Tim in the past. Heather recalled an unsettling encounter with him in the summer of 1989, just months before Mandy's murder. At the time, Heather was 15 years old, sitting in a truck with friends after a softball game. Bass, who was in his 20s, sat next to her. He tried to flirt and made awkward comments about her eyes. Then, Bass took a pen from the cup holder and began rubbing it on her knees. It was very disturbing, Heather said, remembering how uneasy she felt at the time. Marilee had her own unsettling experience with Bass in 1991. One night, she answered a knock at the door to find Bass asking to use the phone. He told her he had been hunting all day and needed to call his wife. When Marilee handed him the phone, he dialed a disconnected number, which immediately raised her suspicions. Feeling uneasy, Marilee watched as Bass walked through her kitchen and into her bedroom. He then told her that he had always been in love with her and wanted to have sex with her right then and there. Terrified, Marilee demanded he leave, but Bass refused. Only after she threatened to call the police did he finally leave her alone. When news of Mandy Stavik's murder spread, Tim Bass was the first name to come up as a suspect. However, at the time, both women were too young and didn't have the guts to speak out, especially since there was no clear evidence linking him to the crime. Tim, along with his younger brother and father, had never been asked to provide a DNA sample. For the past 25 years, he had lived a quiet life in a nearby town, married with 3 kids and working as a delivery driver for a bakery. He had no criminal record and, overall, was a normal working man like many others. But now, the police decided to pay him a visit. They approached Tim Bass calmly, starting with a non-confrontational conversation. When they mentioned Mandy Stavik, Bass claimed not to remember her. It took him a moment before he finally recalled the name. The police asked Tim for a saliva sample to collect his DNA, but he immediately refused, stating he feared the police might frame him for a murder he didn't commit. Out of the 36 men involved in the DNA sweep, when the case was reopened, Tim was the only one who declined to cooperate. With that door closed, the police shifted tactics. They decided to put a surveillance team on him, hoping to collect some DNA from something he might discard during his bakery delivery route. The team followed him all night, hoping he'd throw away something with his DNA on it, but there was no luck. However, the police were not alone in their fight for justice. They reached out to Tim's boss, Kim Wagner, at the bakery where he worked. When the police asked for her help in collecting a DNA sample for Mandy's case, she agreed without hesitation. For months that followed, Kim watched Tim closely at work, waiting for the right moment. At last, one afternoon, she saw him casually toss a plastic cup, followed by a Coke can. She quickly grabbed the items, knowing this could be the break the authorities needed. Kim handed the items over to the police, and months later, the results came back from the state crime lab. The DNA matched. It was a breakthrough that brought a flood of emotions and tears of relief. After almost 3 long decades, the police had finally caught the man responsible for Mandy Stavik's murder. On December 12, 2017, police arrested 50-year-old Tim Bass in the bakery parking lot and charged him with kidnapping, rape, and murder. The news quickly reached the Stavik family, reigniting their hope of finding justice. The police had finally caught the right man, but there was still a long road ahead to prove his guilt in court and lock him up for good. The fight for justice had only just begun.
Were you trying to get me to admit to something I didn't do? Is that what you're trying to do right now?
During the arrest, Tim Bass maintained his innocence, claiming he had a secret that would explain everything. He claimed he had a secret relationship with Mandy, suggesting the DNA match was from that one time when they had sex together, right before she was abducted and murdered. This new information stunned the police, but they doubted its credibility. Just earlier, Tim had claimed he didn't remember who Mandy Stavik was, yet now he was saying he had a relationship with her. The inconsistencies in his story led the detectives to suspect he might be making things up to avoid charges. And if Tim Bass could convince the jury of his version of events, there was a high risk that he would walk out of the courtroom a free man. To ensure justice would be served, detectives knew they needed a strong case, one that included not just forensic evidence, but also a clear motive to explain why Tim committed the murder. So investigators started by looking into Tim Bass's background to better understand the kind of person he was. Speaking with his younger brother, they learned that Tim had always been a loner. However, it wasn't until his teenage years that his brother noticed signs of deeper issues with Tim's social interactions and behavior. Tim's brother recalled a frightening night after Tim's high school girlfriend broke up with him. In a moment of distress, Tim reportedly grabbed a pistol, threatened to take his own life, but only fired the gun into the air. After that incident, Tom noticed a significant change in Tim. He became increasingly hostile, displaying a growing disrespect and disgust toward women. This notion was further supported by Tim's ex-wife. She married him young and described their marriage as less of a partnership and more of a prison. According to her, Tim was controlling, emotionally abusive, and stripped the relationship of any sense of freedom or respect. His hostility toward women wasn't limited to his home life. Tim's boss at the bakery experienced the same disrespect. He never addressed her by name, only calling her woman. She also noted his short temper, saying he could become angry over the smallest things. All of these findings painted Tim as a man who harbored deep resentment toward women and may have acted out violently to assert dominance and control. According to the police, they believed he had fixated on Mandy, possibly even watching her from his window as she jogged past his house. They suspected he had been stalking her for some time before finally acting on his twisted desires. After 28 years, the trial against Mandy Stavik's killer finally began. Dave McEachran, the lead prosecutor, was 73 years old at the time, but chose to come out of retirement to lead the case. He shared the same determination and drive as the community, to uncover the truth behind Mandy's murder and bring justice for her and her family. The prosecution had a clear case. Tim Bass's DNA was found at the crime scene, and it was evident that Mandy had been kidnapped, raped, and murdered. However, the defense disputed these claims, asserting that Tim Bass was innocent and that the sexual encounter between him and Mandy had been consensual. Thus, the DNA found on her body could have been from a consensual encounter earlier in the day, rather than from an assault. Their theory shocked many, and to back up their claims, the defense called a forensic expert who argued that the semen found on Mandy could have been deposited up to 48 hours before her death. This would fit their theory that the sexual encounter between Tim and Mandy was consensual. More importantly, their intercourse happened earlier in the day, rather than being part of the assault before her murder. They even suggested that the lack of a struggle and the nature of the physical contact supported their theory. In contrast, the prosecution's forensic expert disagreed, stating that the evidence indicated the sexual assault occurred shortly before her death. As the trial continued, as the trial progressed, several people took the stand against Tim Bass, gradually revealing his desperate attempts to alter the narrative. Tim's ex-wife took the stand, describing how he had asked her to lie for him after his arrest, even suggesting they blame his deceased father for the crime. Despite her fears, she revealed that she could not bring herself to comply with his requests. Tim's brother also testified, recounting a conversation where Tim confessed to sleeping with Mandy and asked him to lie to the police to discredit her. His brother described the pressure and guilt he felt knowing what he had to do, but understanding the importance of telling the truth. He also revealed that after Tim's arrest, he had asked their mother to provide a fabricated alibi. This further strengthened the case against him. Despite the defense trying to justify Tim's attempts to cover up as the actions of an innocent man under pressure, the evidence against him continued to pile up. As the trial came to an end, both sides made their final arguments, and the jury began deliberating. The DNA evidence, which had been a cornerstone of the trial, remained at the forefront of the jury's consideration as they weighed the facts and the testimony presented. The jury deliberated for just over a day, taking about 5 hours to reach a verdict. However, the wait felt unbearable for both sides as they anxiously awaited the final decision. Although no one testified to seeing Tim and Mandy together, during their deliberations, juror Ed Beeman said they had a lot to discuss about the matter. The jurors turned into investigators and attorneys, reviewing everything, using maps and posters to go over every detail. Juror J. Van Mersbergen said a quarter of the jury was unsure whether there was reasonable doubt. Finally, after 29 years and 6 months since Mandy's death, the courtroom erupted as the verdict was read, guilty.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Timothy Forrest Bass, guilty of the crime of murder in the first degree as
Justice had arrived. Mandy's family was too emotional to speak, but their relief was clear. They were grateful for the outcome. In contrast, when it was time for the Bass family to speak, Tim's mother denied her son's guilt. She attempted to blame his late father for Mandy's death and insisted that Tim was innocent. Before the sentencing, for the first time in the trial, Tim Bass spoke in court. He claimed he was innocent and that he hadn't received a fair trial. But, in an unexpected turn, he said that the better man in him knew he should say little on this day and leave it to the Stavik family. Ultimately, the judge sentenced Tim Bass to the maximum term of nearly 27 years. The severity of his crime could have warranted a life sentence, but prosecutors chose not to charge him with premeditated murder, fearing they might not secure a conviction. Though Tim Bass didn't receive the harshest possible sentence for the abhorrent crime he committed, the Stavik family and the Acme community found peace in the outcome. For nearly 30 years, Tim had lived free from the responsibility of his actions, but his life of freedom had now ended. When asked if he was innocent, Tim still stubbornly insisted he was not guilty. But for those who had spent years seeking justice for Mandy, there was no doubt. After the sentencing, many of those involved gathered to share their thoughts and emotions about the long fight for Mandy's justice. Heather and Marilee were proud of their roles in putting Tim Bass behind bars, knowing it took the testimony of 3 women to finally bring him down. Kim Wagner, who had played a crucial role in securing Tim's DNA sample, credits the people of Acme Town for helping achieve justice. To her, it was the collective effort of the entire community, those who refused to give up on Mandy, and the sheriff's determination to keep her case from going cold, that made justice possible. Kim also expressed that no amount of jail time could ever be enough for Tim to atone for his sins, and he should never be allowed to walk free again. At last, for Mandy's family, the sentence provided some measure of closure. And though it couldn't undo the immeasurable crime against their daughter, at least Tim Bass had finally been held accountable. From that moment on, they believed their healing journey could begin, and the community could finally feel safe again. That brings us to the end of today's episode. What are your thoughts on this heartbreaking case? Do you think Tim Bass deserves the life sentence? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime stories. Until next time, stay safe.